Have you ever felt a cold so sharp it feels like it seeps into your bones, making every breath a struggle? Imagine towns where snow piles higher than rooftops, winds howl like unseen voices, and the sun barely rises for weeks. These are the places where life bends to the frost, where streets once alive now lie silent under ice. Today, we're exploring the 10 coldest states in America, places that winter doesn't just visit, it dominates. If you're enjoying this icy adventure, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Traveling Guide Hub for more amazing explorations. 1. Alaska. The wind in Nome cuts sharper than a blade, carrying the tang of the Bering Sea ice and the faint metallic scent of rusting buildings, making the silence almost unbearable. Founded in 1898 during the Klondike Gold Rush, Nome became a hub of gold fever and dreams, drawing thousands from all over the world. Its streets once bustled with hopeful miners, saloons echoing with laughter and arguments, but as the gold veins dwindled, so did its population. By the mid-20th century, Nome's once thriving neighborhoods were marked by abandoned cabins and empty storefronts, their wooden facades bleached gray by harsh Arctic winters. The town never truly vanished, but many of its outlying mining camps were left to decay, their structures succumbing to wind and frost, creating a landscape where history feels frozen in time. Visitors and locals alike report an unsettling stillness among the old mining districts. Some speak of hearing faint shouts carried by the wind, though no one is there to call them out, and the crunch of footsteps on frozen snow when they are alone in the empty streets. One longtime resident recounted walking past a dilapidated cabin, feeling an immediate chill despite wearing heavy Arctic gear, as if someone unseen had just exhaled icy air down her neck. In other corners of Nome, unexplained lights flicker through windows at night in buildings that have long been empty, and the eerie creak of swinging signs seems to echo voices from another era. Even seasoned adventurers have noted the heavy feeling of being watched, a subtle tension in the air that tightens your chest as you move through areas where men and women once chased fortune. The town's winter amplifies these sensations. Darkness falls early, often by 3 in the afternoon, and the wind whistles through gaps in abandoned structures, producing a haunting melody that can leave visitors disoriented. The cold penetrates more than clothing. It seems to press into the mind, sharpening every sound and shadow until the mundane feels uncanny. Even experienced photographers and historians have described moments of profound unease walking alone in these empty streets, where the past and present seem to brush against each other invisibly. As the sun barely rises over the horizon, illuminating frost-covered ruins and silent cabins, it's easy to feel the weight of all those who came hoping to strike it rich and left nothing behind but whispers. Nome doesn't shout its history. It lingers quietly in the wind and the cold. And sometimes, in that hush, one can't help but wonder, what stories remain trapped in the frozen silence, still waiting for someone to hear them? 2. North Dakota. The prairie wind in Medora bites with a dry, icy edge, carrying the faint scent of frozen soil and the distant tang of livestock pens, making each step across the snow-covered streets feel impossibly vast and empty. Medora was founded in 1883, rising as a gateway to the Badlands and a center for cattle ranching and trade. Its downtown once thrived with merchants, hotels, and saloons, echoing with the laughter and clatter of pioneers and cowboys. But as railroads bypassed the town and ranching patterns shifted, Medora's population dwindled, leaving behind wooden storefronts and boardwalks now warped and bleached by relentless winters. Though the town survives as a small tourist hub today, the surrounding abandoned homesteads and frontier buildings stand frozen in time, capturing a harsh history of ambition and isolation. Visitors report an eerie sense of stillness when walking among the old ranches and deserted streets. Several travelers have described hearing faint whinnies or the rhythmic clatter of hooves on snow when no animals are present, as if echoes of the past refuse to fade. One visitor noted that while exploring a long-abandoned farmhouse, the cold seemed to deepen suddenly, pressing into her shoulders and neck despite her thick winter coat, and a soft creak of a swinging door made her pause, though the building had no wind currents. Others have noticed inexplicable shadows stretching unnaturally across the snow, or the faint smell of smoke in cabins that haven't seen a fire in decades. These subtle sensations leave many uneasy, aware of the town's once bustling life, now suspended in silence. The North Dakota winter intensifies this atmosphere. Nights stretch endlessly, with temperatures routinely plunging below -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind cuts across open fields like a constant whisper of forgotten voices. Snowdrifts bury fences and roads, muting sound and adding to the town's isolation, while the faint crunch of boots becomes startlingly loud in the heavy, frozen air. Longtime locals admit that even experienced hikers and photographers feel a heightened awareness, a subtle pressure in the chest, as if the land itself remembers the lives it once held. As sunlight barely touches the Badlands, casting long skeletal shadows across empty streets and frozen pastures, Medora feels like a threshold between what was and what remains unspoken. Its silence is thick, almost sentient, carrying the whispers of ambition, struggle, and solitude. And in that endless winter quiet, one can't help but wonder, how many of these stories will remain forever buried beneath the frost, waiting for someone brave enough to listen?
3. Minnesota. The icy breeze off Lake Superior slices through Duluth like a razor, carrying the briny scent of the water mixed with the sharp metallic tang of frost-coated docks. Minnesota's port towns once thrived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, their economies driven by shipping, timber, and iron ore. Duluth, in particular, became a crucial hub connecting the Great Lakes to the rest of the country, its streets crowded with sailors, laborers, and immigrants chasing opportunity. Winters were always brutal, but the town endured, while smaller mining and logging settlements around the state often succumbed to isolation, harsh conditions, and economic decline. Many of these abandoned communities, now buried under snow and ice for months at a time, leave a haunting imprint of lives built and lost to the relentless northern cold. Those who wander Minnesota's deserted ghost towns and frozen logging camps describe sensations that linger long after they leave. Several hikers have reported hearing the faint thump of falling timber or distant axes, though the forests have long been silent. In other abandoned villages, locals speak of a sudden heaviness in the air, a chill that penetrates more than clothing, pressing on the chest and shoulders, as though the buildings themselves remember the labor and hardships once endured there. One visitor noted seeing a door swing open in an old snow-crusted cabin, accompanied by a faint creaking floorboard, though the structure was locked and untouched for decades. Others have described soft, unintelligible whispers carried by the wind, vanishing the moment they strain to listen, leaving only the sound of their own rapid heartbeat and crunching boots in the snow. Minnesota's winters magnify the feeling of isolation. Temperatures regularly fall below -25 degrees Fahrenheit. Lakes freeze solid, and snowdrifts block roads, cutting off access to settlements for weeks at a time. The sun rises late and sets early, casting long, bluish shadows over frozen landscapes, and the wind whistles through empty streets and abandoned homes, carrying the faint echoes of a once thriving state. Visitors often remark that the cold does more than numb fingers and toes. It sharpens every sound and shadow, creating an almost surreal awareness of the past lingering in each snow-covered ruin. As twilight settles over the frozen land, the abandoned cabins, silent streets, and frost-laden forests of Minnesota seem to hold their own memories, silent testimonies to ambition, endurance, and lives shaped by harsh winter. Walking through them, you can almost feel the weight of history pressing against your chest, and you begin to wonder, How many of these echoes will survive the thaw, and how many will remain trapped beneath the snow, whispered only to those willing to listen?
4. Maine. The wind off Penobscot Bay sweeps through the abandoned fishing villages of Maine with a briny sting, carrying the scent of seaweed, cold saltwater, and rotting wood. Many of these coastal towns, such as Cryhaven and the old lumber settlements inland, were founded in the 18th and 19th centuries, thriving on fishing, shipbuilding, and timber. Maine's rugged terrain and long winters shaped the lives of its residents, making survival a test of endurance. Over time, however, as fisheries declined and logging became less profitable, these towns slowly emptied. Wooden piers splintered under ice, houses sagged under heavy snow, and the streets that once carried the sounds of laughter, trade, and sea shanties fell silent, leaving behind only frost-covered remnants of life. Locals and visitors recount experiences that make these towns feel almost alive in their emptiness. One visitor, walking along a snow-covered dock, described feeling an inexplicable shiver, as if unseen eyes were watching from the boarded-up houses. Others have reported hearing faint footsteps in abandoned streets where no one walks, or the distant sound of waves slapping against hulls that no longer exist. In old cabins, the wind often whistles through cracks in the walls in a way that mimics human voices, soft enough to startle but never clearly intelligible. Some long-time residents claim that the icy forests around the towns carry a heavy stillness, a quiet weight pressing down on the chest, as though the land remembers all who once worked and lived there. Maine's winters are particularly unforgiving. Temperatures frequently plunge below -20 degrees Fahrenheit, snowdrifts bury entire streets, and ice sheets cover harbors for months. The combination of bitter cold, howling wind, and long nights intensifies the sense of isolation. Even seasoned explorers report feeling their senses sharpen in these conditions, noticing shadows that move oddly and sounds that seem just out of reach. Every creaking roof, snapping branch, or distant splash becomes amplified in the frozen silence, making the history of the town almost tangible. As the first pale light of morning touches the frost-covered roofs and frozen docks, these Maine towns seem suspended between past and present. Their silence carries the echoes of hard work, resilience, and lives shaped by the harsh Atlantic winters. Walking among them, it's impossible not to sense the weight of those who came before, and one quietly wonders how many of their stories are buried under ice and snow, waiting for someone to hear them. 5. Montana. The wind sweeps down from the Rocky Mountains in Virginia City with a biting, dry chill, carrying the faint scent of pine resin mixed with the metallic tang of old mining equipment left to rust. Montana's mining towns, like Virginia City and Bannack, were founded in the 1860s during the gold and silver rushes, booming almost overnight as prospectors and entrepreneurs poured in with dreams of fortune. Streets once echoed with the clatter of horses' hooves, the hammering of blacksmiths, and the chatter of hopeful miners. But as veins of precious metals ran dry and larger cities drew residents away, these towns slowly emptied. Wooden buildings weathered by snow and wind creak and sag under Montana's harsh winters, leaving ghostly streets that whisper of ambition and struggle frozen in time. Visitors report an unsettling stillness that seems alive with memory. Some have described hearing distant hammering or the faint jingle of harness bells, though no one is around. One adventurer exploring an abandoned cabin recalled the sudden oppressive cold that pressed against her lungs as she stepped inside, despite wearing layers of winter gear.
Shadows appear to stretch unnaturally across empty streets, and the groan of old timber under frost-laden roofs echoes like footsteps following unseen figures. Locals sometimes mention a heavy sensation in the chest when passing through the ghost towns, as if the land itself remembers the miners' toil and loss, and winter intensifies this weight. Montana's winters are unforgiving. Temperatures frequently drop below -25 degrees Fahrenheit, and snow can bury streets and mine entrances for weeks at a time. The thin air at high elevation sharpens every sound: the snap of a branch, the creak of a door, the whistle of wind through abandoned chimneys, turning ordinary noises into eerie signals of the past. Visitors often feel disoriented as the combination of blinding snow, early darkness, and empty streets warps perception, leaving a sense that the line between history and present is thinner than it should be. As sunlight barely touches the frost-covered rooftops and snow-packed streets, these Montana towns seem suspended in time, their silence heavy with the stories of those who labored and hoped here long ago. And walking through them, one feels both awe and melancholy, aware that life once thrived in places now frozen and still. And as the wind whistles down the deserted avenues, it leaves a lingering question: how many of the dreams and struggles of these early settlers remain etched into the land, waiting for someone to notice them?
6. Wisconsin. The wind howls across the frozen fields near Ashland, Wisconsin, carrying the scent of pine mixed with the acrid tang of ice-covered harbor water, and it bites through even the thickest winter coats. Ashland, like many small towns along Lake Superior, rose in the mid-19th century as a timber and shipping hub, bustling with sawmills, docks, and trading posts. Its streets once echoed with the rhythmic thrum of saws, the chatter of workers, and the cries of gulls over the harbor. But as timber resources dwindled and shipping routes shifted, much of the town's population moved away, leaving behind decaying wooden buildings, empty storefronts, and piers coated in frost and rust. The town survives, but surrounding abandoned settlements and mills remain frozen relics, testaments to a past both industrious and harsh. Visitors and locals alike describe a strange atmosphere in these forgotten areas. One photographer recounted walking past a derelict sawmill and feeling a sudden chill descend, pressing against her shoulders as though invisible hands were leaning close. Others have reported hearing footsteps echoing across snow-packed streets, or the distant scrape of a metal door in empty warehouses, though no one is present. In some abandoned homes, the wind whistles through gaps in the walls, carrying faint, unintelligible murmurs that vanish when listeners strain to understand. Residents mention a peculiar heaviness in the air, an almost oppressive awareness that seems to follow anyone daring to explore these winter-battered ruins. Wisconsin winters amplify these sensations. Temperatures can drop below -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the lake-effect snow piles high against abandoned streets and buildings, muting sound and heightening the sense of isolation. Even experienced hikers and explorers notice their senses sharpened by the cold. The creak of wood, the distant groan of ice, and the rustle of snow-draped branches all become unnervingly vivid. Long shadows stretch across frost-covered storefronts, and the eerie silence between gusts of wind seems filled with unspoken stories of the laborers and families who once lived there. As the pale morning light glances off icy rooftops and snow-laden streets, these Wisconsin towns seem suspended between memory and reality. Their stillness carries the weight of a bygone era, a reminder of lives built and lost in relentless winters. Walking through them, one cannot escape the quiet tension, the sense that the past lingers just beneath the snow and ice. And in that frozen hush, it begs the question: how many of these stories will remain untold, waiting for someone willing to listen to the echoes of Wisconsin's winter past?
7. Michigan.
The icy wind off Lake Superior rattles the empty windows of old Marquette buildings, carrying the sharp scent of frozen water, pine, and rusted metal from abandoned docks. Michigan's Upper Peninsula towns, founded in the mid-19th century, thrived on iron ore mining, logging, and shipping. Marquette itself grew rapidly as a hub for miners and sailors, its streets filled with the clang of hammers, the creak of wagons, and the laughter of families chasing opportunity. But as the mines were exhausted and the timber trade declined, many smaller towns and mining camps were abandoned, leaving behind frost-coated cabins, silent streets, and rusting machinery frozen in time. Winter only deepens their solitude, making every empty street and snow-laden rooftop feel both vast and unnervingly still. Visitors recount experiences that make these towns feel alive with memory. One hiker described stepping onto a snow-packed dock and feeling an immediate chill that penetrated his thick winter jacket, as if invisible eyes were watching. Others have reported hearing faint footsteps in deserted streets or the distant metallic clang of old mining equipment when the wind blows just right. In some cabins, the wind whistles through the walls in a rhythm that almost resembles speech, subtle enough to be unsettling, yet impossible to understand. Locals say that walking through these ghost towns leaves a peculiar heaviness on the chest, a quiet tension as if the echoes of miners' labors and daily lives linger stubbornly in the cold air. Michigan winters amplify the sense of isolation and unease. Temperatures often plunge below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Snowdrifts bury streets, and ice coats docks, roofs, and railways, muting sound and stretching the darkness well into the day. The crunch of boots on frozen snow becomes alarmingly loud, and shadows from skeletal trees and abandoned structures stretch unnaturally across the streets. Explorers frequently remark that their senses sharpen in this cold. The subtle creak of wood, the distant groan of ice, even the faint rush of wind all feel weighted with the town's history. As dawn's pale light touches the icy rooftops and snow-draped streets, these Michigan towns seem frozen between past and present. Their silence carries the weight of ambition, endurance, and the harsh realities of life in northern winters. Walking among them, it's impossible not to feel the lingering presence of those who came before, leaving one to wonder how many stories of toil, hope, and hardship remain trapped in the cold, waiting for someone to notice.
8. Vermont. The wind whistles through the narrow streets of Wilmington, Vermont, carrying the crisp scent of pine, snow, and frozen earth, and it bites at exposed skin with a sharp, icy sting. Vermont's small towns, like Wilmington and old mill villages along the Deerfield River, were founded in the 18th and 19th centuries, thriving on timber, paper mills, and small-scale farming. Their streets once echoed with the rhythmic sounds of sawmills, horse-drawn wagons, and children playing in the snow. But as industrialization shifted production to larger cities and local mills closed, many of these towns dwindled, leaving behind abandoned homes, silent factories, and streets blanketed in frost and snow. Winter here is long and harsh, stretching over 6 months in some areas, and the cold amplifies the feeling of isolation that lingers in these empty villages. Visitors often speak of unsettling sensations when exploring Vermont's abandoned towns. One hiker described walking past an empty mill and suddenly feeling a deep chill that seemed to settle around her shoulders, even through layers of winter clothing. Others report hearing the faint creak of floorboards or the distant rush of water through frozen channels, though no one is present. In some old farmhouses, the wind whistles through broken windows in a pattern that almost resembles whispers, soft and fleeting, leaving explorers unsure if they imagined it. Locals say the air in these deserted areas carries a weight, a subtle tension that tightens the chest and quickens the heartbeat, as if the past refuses to release its hold. Vermont's winters intensify these experiences. Temperatures regularly drop below -15 degrees Fahrenheit, and snow can accumulate in drifts high enough to bury fences and narrow streets. The early darkness and long nights amplify the sense of solitude, while the crunch of boots on frozen snow becomes unnervingly loud. Even seasoned adventurers find that shadows stretch across the snow-covered streets in unusual ways, and ordinary noises like the snap of a branch or the groan of a roof under ice take on a haunting presence. As sunlight struggles to illuminate frost-coated rooftops and snow-laden streets, these Vermont towns feel suspended between past and present, their silence heavy with the weight of human labor and winter's relentless grip. Walking among them, one senses the lives that once flourished here and wonders how many stories of hope, hardship, and resilience are buried beneath the snow, waiting for someone to uncover them.
9. New Hampshire. The wind slices through the streets of Bethlehem, New Hampshire, carrying the crisp scent of fir trees, frozen soil, and old chimney smoke, leaving a biting chill on exposed skin. Bethlehem and similar small towns in the White Mountains were established in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, thriving on timber, paper mills, and later tourism for those seeking mountain retreats. Their streets once echoed with the sound of saws, horse-drawn sleighs, and children laughing in the snow. However, as industrial centers grew elsewhere and winters became increasingly harsh for isolated communities, many settlements dwindled, leaving behind frost-covered homes, abandoned inns, and snow-laden streets where history feels frozen in time. Visitors and locals often recount eerie sensations while exploring these deserted areas. One winter traveler described walking past a long empty inn and suddenly feeling a cold pressure around her chest, as if invisible hands brushed her shoulders, even through multiple layers of winter clothing. Others have reported hearing footsteps on packed snow when they were alone, or the faint creak of shutters in abandoned homes that had not been opened in decades. In some houses, the wind whistles through broken windows and gaps in walls in patterns that mimic faint, unintelligible whispers. Locals claim that walking through these ghostly towns leaves a subtle but heavy tension, a feeling that the lives once lived here are somehow still present, lingering invisibly. New Hampshire winters magnify this sense of isolation and unease. Temperatures can drop below -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and snow often blankets streets and paths for weeks at a time, muffling sound and stretching the darkness. Shadows from leafless trees and snow-covered buildings lengthen unnaturally in the short daylight, while ordinary noises like the groan of old timber or the snap of a frozen branch take on a haunting weight. Even seasoned explorers report that the cold sharpens every sense, heightening awareness of every subtle sound and movement, making the past feel close enough to touch. As the pale morning light illuminates frost-covered rooftops and snow-draped streets, these New Hampshire towns seem suspended between memory and reality. Their quiet holds the weight of decades of labor, hope, and isolation, frozen in the relentless grip of winter. Walking among them, it's impossible not to feel the lingering presence of those who came before, and one cannot help but wonder how many of these stories remain hidden beneath the snow, waiting for someone willing to hear them.
10. Wyoming. The wind sweeps across the empty streets of South Pass City, Wyoming, carrying the crisp scent of sagebrush, snow, and rusting iron from abandoned mining equipment. Founded in the 1860s during the gold rush, South Pass City became a bustling hub for miners, merchants, and families chasing fortune along the Rocky Mountains' western slopes. Its streets once rang with the clatter of wagons, the hammering of blacksmiths, and the chatter of hopeful prospectors. But as the gold veins ran dry and mining activity slowed, the town's population dwindled, leaving behind weathered wooden structures, frozen streets, and silent saloons that seemed suspended in time. Winters here are severe, with snow covering the landscape for months, deepening the sense of isolation and stillness in this once vibrant town. Visitors and locals alike report sensations that make the town feel alive with memory. One traveler recounted walking past a shuttered cabin and feeling an icy pressure press against his shoulders, even through heavy winter gear. Others have described hearing faint footsteps or the distant creak of a swinging door in empty streets, sounds that vanish when they search for their source. Some longtime residents note that the air carries a subtle heaviness, as if the land itself retains the echoes of miners' labor and daily life. In other corners of South Pass City, the wind whistles through gaps in old structures in patterns that resemble quiet murmurs, leaving explorers with a lingering sense of being watched, though no one is there. Wyoming's winters intensify these experiences. Temperatures can plunge below -25 degrees Fahrenheit, snowdrifts pile high against buildings, and the wind howls through deserted streets, muffling ordinary sounds and amplifying the eerie silence. The combination of biting cold, early darkness, and open plains creates a sense of vulnerability, where even minor sounds, the snap of a branch or groan of ice-laden timber, feel weighted with history. Visitors often report heightened awareness in these conditions, every shadow seeming to stretch unnaturally, every creak of wood drawing the imagination toward the town's past. As the pale light of dawn touches frost-covered roofs and snow-packed streets, South Pass City appears suspended between memory and reality. Its silence holds the weight of ambition, toil, and lives left behind in harsh winters, a frozen testament to a bygone era. Walking among its empty buildings, one cannot escape the sense of history lingering in the cold, and it leaves a lingering question. How many of these stories, etched into the land, remain hidden beneath the snow, waiting for someone to notice them? As the winter winds sweep across these frozen states, it's clear that the cold does more than bite. It leaves an imprint on every abandoned street, every frost-covered cabin, and every shadowed corner. These towns carry stories of ambition, survival, and lives shaped by relentless winters, frozen in time, yet quietly speaking to those who dare to explore. Which of these icy states would you brave in the dead of winter? Share your thoughts in the comments below.